Welcome to Middle School Feminist, a podcast hosted by a middle schooler featuring all kinds of cool people here to talk about feminism. So, what is feminism? Well, the dictionary defines it as advocating for social, political, and other rights for women equal to those of men. But this lady defines feminism in her own way. Let me introduce my guest today, Jayna Fitzsimmons. Jayna works in the theater department of Augustana University and is a passionate local feminist. Jayna, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on your podcast, Avery.
Of course. Let's get started. First off, can you define feminism in your own words?
Yeah, and I think this is a really important question because feminism is going to be different for everybody. So I'm really glad that you asked that. And it's all about kind of how individuals choose to practice feminism personally. But going off of the definition that you cited at the beginning, I think that it does something really important, right? It says that women are equal to men. That's kind of the basic tenet of feminism. And I think that's really important to acknowledge, that it's a really simple definition. And something that I kind of like to sort of broaden it a little bit and think of all genders as equal to one another. And, you know, how we need to kind of look at women as autonomous human beings that have the same freedoms and right to self-determination that any other gender would, particularly men.
Yeah, that was beautifully stated.
Oh,
I love that. So, let's get into the theme of our show today, which is the importance of feminism in a conservative environment. So, why do you think it's important to share our opinions even when they differ from others?
I think that it's really important because that's the fabric of kind of social discourse. Mm-hmm. If everybody had the same opinion, while we might get a lot done, it would make for kind of a boring world to live in, and everybody's experiences are going to dictate kind of their own personal beliefs. So I think the most important thing in thinking about kind of how we speak with people who have different opinions than us is that we just open that space for listening and conversation that can be meaningful.
Yeah. Do you think that being a feminist in a red state is different than being a feminist in a blue state?
Yes and no. This is a really interesting question. I've been a feminist in a blue state before. I've been a feminist in a red state. I live in a red state now. Yeah. And so really the big difference is that in a red state, it can be more difficult to find your community and kind of find like-minded people, but they're there. So it's just important to know you might have to look a little harder. Yeah. But you can find a community of like-minded feminists where, you know, you can kind of have those conversations. And, you know, it can be as difficult in a blue state too, don't get me wrong. But just because you sort of live in one place doesn't mean that you have to be defined by that space or that context.
Yeah, that was a really good answer.
A really good question.
Thank you. So I've met multiple kids at my school who say that they support gender equality, but they're not feminist, which is really contradictory. Yeah. So why do you think that some people are so resistant to being labeled as a feminist?
I'm really glad you asked this question too, because this is one that I see come up a lot with my own students who are university students and with people I know. And kind of the short answer is, sadly, feminism has kind of a branding problem. It's seen as kind of the other F word. Like, it's, you know, in some circles, like, you know, because there's this misconception that feminism is about hating men, or kind of flipping. Right now, we live in a patriarchal society where you know, kind of men are kind of on top of the heap, and so some people think that women want to switch that and they want to be in charge. And in reality, and I think that your introduction really helped dispel this, is that, you know, feminism is about equality between genders. So I think it's kind of a lack of understanding of what the term actually means. But yeah, and I think too, something that I think is really great about young people today is that they want to resist labels, right? They don't want to be defined as anything. And that can be so useful, and I love that. But sometimes it can be really useful to kind of band together under an umbrella term like feminism, because then you kind of can find others with really, you know, who are really passionate about issues that you are as well. And it also acknowledges the struggle of women and feminists that came before us. So that's why I think it's an important kind of identifying term, even though sometimes it can be problematic to kind of label people.
that actually is, that really does lead us into our next question, which is, one word I hear tossed around a lot is the term feminazi. Have you heard of it before?
Yes, and I'm so sad that you've heard it tossed around a lot. I
hate it.
I mean, it's a disgusting term. It's vile to me. And when I've heard that term, and when I hear it used, right? I mean, it's a sexist slur. And when people use language like that, you know, we can kind of be critical of how that language is used. What are they trying to do? What's their goal? And when people use any sort of slur like that to put down a group of people, it's to silence them and to delegitimize what their aims are, what they're wanting to do. And so I think we need to look at that term as trying to achieve both of those things. And when we know what it's trying to do, we can kind of resist that, right? We can work against it. But yeah, I think that kind of identifying a movement that hopes for equality between genders, equating that with the Nazi movement in any way, I think is really, it's ignorant. And I think that word needs to kind of go away, right?
Yes.
And so that's why I was bummed when I heard that you had been hearing it, because I'm thinking, oh no, hopefully that's not something that's used anymore. But
it is.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and I didn't know that it had. I thought it was kind of like a relatively new word, but I guess it must not be.
Unfortunately, no. No. But yeah, so I think, you know, one of the best things we can do when we hear that term, and, you know, if we say something and we're met with that term, is to use that as an opportunity to educate whoever it is that said it.
Yeah.
Because chances are it's just based in an ignorance about what feminism as a movement really means. And then, you know, it's an important thing to do as women, to call that type of thing out when we see it. And so if we can say, hey, that's a really offensive term, and here's why I feel that way, that can open up space for a really important conversation to happen.
Yeah. And so another thing that I hear a lot around school, besides the term feminazi, is that feminism is pointless and unneeded and unnecessary, which is obviously so not true. But why do you think that feminism is so important to keep relevant, especially today?
Really good question, again, Avery. This, in the world that we live in today, it can be really easy to kind of think we're past the need for feminism. And you maybe have heard or will hear the term like post-feminist. We live in a post-feminist world because women have equal rights and women can do the same jobs and things like that. And I don't want to discount the types of advances that have led us to our present moment. However, we don't want to be blind to the many ways where women are still treated as second-class citizens in our country and throughout the world. So, you know, I kind of made this little list, right? Like, you know, even though we've made advances, we can't kind of avert our eyes from the way our society falls short. So, for instance, like the pay gap. Right? So men and women for the same job do not yet make equal pay. Women make
that's terrible.
Right. I mean, it's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Women make about 70 cents to the dollar for what men make. Not to mention that oftentimes in like a domestic situation, like household tasks are not divided equally between men and women.
Yes.
And women are often kind of charged with all sorts of emotional labor that they're not paid for, right? So women are expected to be nurturing and to kind of take care of everybody else and to be the one that, you know, offers a listening ear or a shoulder to cry on. And that's work, and that can, you know, kind of add up too. We also, unfortunately, live in a culture that not only permits gendered and sexual violence, but stigmatizes people who survive gendered violence or sexual violence. There is major issues with, you know, access to reproductive health care, birth control, things like that, and healthcare in general for women. And so also, you know, look at who's serving in leadership roles in our country, in a corporation you admire, in, if you watch, you know, a movie, look at the credits and see, you know, okay, is the director a woman? I mean, you'll notice that in leadership positions, it's a lot of men.
Yeah.
And so, and I don't want to like sort of turn us all into doom and gloom, but these are places where we can do better. And this is why we need feminism. I mean, you know, you've probably heard the kind of slogan that women's rights are human rights. And so we need to keep that at the forefront of our mind, I think, as feminists, when we kind of look to how things are being decided, how things are being governed, and even how women are represented in media. So these are all ways that we can do better.
Yeah.
And just like we needed feminism in the past, we need it today.
I feel like for the most part there will always be a need for feminism, but hopefully it's getting better.
Yeah, and I think, and we
still
absolutely
have a ways to
can't
go.
ignore the fact that, you know, like, your dad does not, like, own you, right?
Yeah.
I'm not property of my husband.
Yeah.
You know, so we can, like, celebrate that, absolutely. But you're absolutely right, Avery, that like, we do need to kind of keep moving forward.
Yeah.
Keep making progress.
So, moving on a bit, I do have a couple of general questions. What do you think is the biggest problem faced by modern-day feminists?
This is a really good question, and a really hard question to answer.
Yeah.
So this is a challenging one, and I'm so glad you asked. I think one of the big challenges, like we talked about, is just the sort of branding of feminism, that people are really resistant to kind of take up the mantle of feminism because they don't know what it is. So that challenge then becomes to educate people. And doing something like this is a great way to make those steps.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And also, I think one of the challenges that we have now in our own current moment in the United States is to kind of keep that momentum, that good momentum that arose with something like the Women's March, and say, okay, we're all sort of in this together. How can we leverage our collective strength for the good of the most people we can? And how can we, raise our voices for positive political action that can really impact the lives of women positively?
Yeah. So, how do you think feminism affects your daily life?
I love this question because I think that everything I do is impacted by my feminism, my feminist practice. I mean, that's feminism in general, and learning about feminism and reading about feminism has made me a much more empathetic person. That it's opened my eyes to the experiences of all different types of women. It's made me acknowledge my own privilege as a white woman, as someone who's middle class and educated. I think that it makes me really aware of kind of my blind spots when I think, my experience is going to be totally different than a woman of color or someone who is a woman with a disability or a woman who hasn't had access to education. So it's made me kind of reflect on my own life and how I can, better be of service to this community of women. It's allowed me to meet some really incredible people and have conversations like this with amazing women. And two, as somebody who's an artist, it really influences my artistic practice. It influences the projects that I choose to undertake. The sort of the people that I choose to work with and the messages that I want to get across in my work. So really, I think that it touches every facet of my daily life, and thank goodness.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, one final question. So, since we live in a red state, which is a pretty conservative environment, what do you think are some easy steps we can take to be part of the feminist movement?
Great question. So, being a feminist and being part of the feminist movement, all you have to do is identify as a feminist. So, congratulations. Like, if you say, I'm a feminist, you're in. Like, there's no test, there's no secret handshake, there's nothing like that. But some easy steps to kind of start your feminist practice, if that's something that you're interested in doing, are a couple things. So, number one is have conversations with people. Ask questions. Talk about the things that are important to you, and read and think about anything that you can in terms of feminism, and support other women. Most important thing.
That's perfect, Jayna. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was fantastic to have you, and you are so well spoken, and you're such an amazing woman.
Oh, you rock.
Thank you so much.